Are you concerned about China's ownership in container ports across the world? Might that be a hindrance, a problem for U.S. commercial and national security interests abroad?
Well, as we seek to de-risk and diversify our supply chains and our economic relationships, we do want to make sure that these capabilities are not concentrated with any one country. Certainly with a country that may demonstrate a willingness to use these in ways that are not connected to what is the best going forward, either commercially or in terms of that rules-based international order. We want to make sure that at least when we can agree on matters from climate change to public health, that we're operating on a basis that can be understood to be for the benefit of all. Those are the kinds of things we're focused on here at the G7.
You talk about de-risking. Are there any other sectors that need de-risking? Some point to perhaps even the drug sector in China. I mean, the world is reliant on basic drugs when it comes to, China.
Well, I want to make sure not to wander too far outside of my own portfolio. I know that these are subjects of active conversation, both bilaterally and multilaterally. What I can say with regard to supply chains is that we have seen how if there is not enough diversification, you see extraordinary levels of geopolitical risk or even just logistical risk, in the U.S. Because of the extreme variation between the closures and the reopenings in Asia and in China specifically. There's a great deal of unevenness in terms of the arrival of goods that our ports were not ready to take in all at once. I think that's one example of the kind of wake-up calls that the U.S. and that the global community in general have been experiencing, especially in the last 2 to 3 years.
Since we're talking about supply chains, of course, semiconductors front and center. We've had the Chip 4, US, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, investing heavily in their own respective semiconductor sectors. Could that lead to overcapacity? What's your assessment? How are you looking at it?
Well, right now, overcapacity seems to be the least of our problems when it comes to the race for semiconductors, and we saw how problematic it was when we came up short. Of course, this is a process where the very intentional, direct, and ambitious use of public policy has to match the unique ability of markets to allocate resources and to help make sure that the capacity is tracking the future of demand. But what we know is that semiconductors are going to be even more important in the future. We think about the automotive sector, for example, and the fact that a car is increasingly as much a computer as it is a vehicle. And the same could be said of so many other sectors. So rather than allow ourselves to again be in a situation where we're coming up short, we're making sure that both in terms of our relationships with friends and trading partners and in terms of our domestic capacity, which by the way has also benefited from foreign direct investment that's really helping to create jobs on U.S. soil while strengthening our partnerships and relationships across the Pacific. That is something that makes sense for the future and can help us to cushion some of the geopolitical risk.
Boeing looking to resume its deliveries of the MAX jets to China. Is there a sense when that might be happen? How are you trying to push this along with the Chinese government?
Well, our focus from the FAA's standpoint and the U.S. Department of Transportation is simply on the certification and safety. The rest is a market matter, one that obviously there's a lot of interest from a trade perspective, but we're very cautious in our administration, certainly in my department, to separate trade questions from safety questions, and the safety questions are our top focus.
You talked about EVs, the big boys, the likes of GM, Ford. They've come forward to say that, they're ready to adopt Tesla's Superchargers. How do you look at that? Will that perhaps, make it even more difficult for your department to have oversight over Tesla's autopilot?
We view the relationship that's been established in terms of chargers as a positive development. Our biggest concern is simply to make sure that a good, strong charging network is available. In other words, as a U.S. government, we're not out to pick winners and losers and say that this company or this company's standard is better than the others. We did establish a baseline in terms of access to a certain connector to make sure that everybody knew what to expect, but that was designed to be a floor and not a ceiling. Likewise, with chargers more generally, we're establishing certain rules, especially for any charger that benefits from U.S. government subsidies, making sure that the pricing is transparent, making sure there's a high standard of reliability, making sure they're interoperable so that there's no walled garden where you are confined to a membership with one company in order to access chargers. And what's remarkable about the relationship that's been established, for example, with Ford and Tesla is it means that many more drivers will have access to those chargers. And look, no one has more experience in deploying chargers across the United States than Tesla. Now, it's also important to remember that while connectors are a key part, of course, in the charging of an electric vehicle, they are a part that is adaptable. There can be adapters. This is why I think the format war analogy to the days of VHS and Betamax, for example, doesn't fully fit here. The biggest challenges we've seen with installing and maintaining chargers have to do with the utilities, the site readiness. When you add up all of the challenges in terms of getting a good charger up and running, the connector is not your biggest problem.
Is it fair then to say that you are comfortable with Tesla Superchargers being the de facto standard?
Well, in terms of the connector, I think, again, we want to make sure that if you have a CCS car, you can get access to charging. But if things evolve in the direction of that NACS standard that Tesla has developed, the most important thing is that we ultimately get a kind of convergence. And again, this is an area where we're not focused so much on putting the thumb on the scale for this company or that company. We are putting a thumb on the scale for making sure that EVs develop quickly enough to help us meet our climate goals in a way that creates good paying American jobs and on an equitable basis, because often some of the people who would most stand to benefit from the cost savings of EV ownership might not have access to that if, for example, they live in a multifamily dwelling where it's not yet profitable for the private sector alone to be installing chargers. That's where we come in and help.